The 8th of December 2005. The first light of dawn hits the glass towers of Tokyo. It is a sharp, unforgiving morning. The temperature hovers just above freezing, and the streets of the financial district are still mostly empty. A few early commuters walk briskly, their breath turning to mist in the crisp air. The city looks orderly. It looks precise. In the high-rise offices, the lights are already flickering on, illuminating row upon row of desks that wait for the day to begin. There is no hint of the storm coming. The market clock ticks toward the opening bell, with the steady, rhythmic pulse of a machine. Everything is calibrated. Everything is ready. The world is unaware that, in a few short hours, the financial landscape will be irrevocably altered by a single, catastrophic input. For now, there's only the quiet hum of a system bracing for the start of business. The sun climbs higher, casting long, geometric shadows across the pavement. It is a day like any other, until the moment it is not. Inside the offices of Mizuho Securities, the silence of the dawn evaporated. The floor filled with the low-frequency drone of hundreds of cooling fans. A heavy, bitter scent of roasted coffee beans drifted through the air, clinging to the rows of desks. Traders arrived in waves, their movements fluid and practiced. Each person moved with a singular purpose, settling into chairs, adjusting monitors, and checking the status of their connections. Fingers tapped against plastic keys in a disjointed, rhythmic percussion. Screens flickered, displaying lines of data that scrolled in endless, glowing columns. There was no conversation. The focus was entirely on the numbers, cascading down the glass. Every station was a command center, a small island of order in a vast high-stakes sea. The air grew thick with the anticipation of the market bell. Coffee cups were set aside as hands hovered over keyboards. The flickering green and red digits on the screen seemed to pulsate, mirroring the collective heartbeat of the floor. Minutes drifted by. The system was live, the network was primed, and the entire trading floor held its breath, waiting for the signal to execute. At a desk near the center of the floor, one man sat perfectly still. He adjusted his chair, the wheels clicking against the floor tiles. His gaze was locked onto the glowing terminal, a single point of light in the vast, flickering room. He did not look around. He did not speak to his colleagues. His world had narrowed down to the cursor blinking rhythmically on his screen, a persistent, mechanical heartbeat that demanded his full attention. He reached out and tapped a key, clearing a stray window to reveal a fresh data feed. The light from the monitor washed over his face, casting sharp highlights on his features. Yet his expression remained entirely neutral. He was waiting. He was the gatekeeper of his own small corner of the market, a professional operating with the assumption of total control. He checked his coffee, took a single measured sip, and placed the cup down with precision. He reached for the keyboard again, his fingers hovering just millimeters above the keys. He was ready for the day, for the routine, for the millions that would flow through his workstation. He had no idea that the next few keystrokes would rewrite the history of the firm and send shockwaves through the entire global financial system. The silence shattered. A sharp, digital chirp sliced through the air. The trader did not jump. He simply turned his head toward the device. He pressed a button on his headset, the movement smooth and well-rehearsed. A voice crackled through the earpiece, thin and distant, vibrating with the urgency of a client needing to move. The request was standard, almost boring in its simplicity. One share, JCOM, a new recruiting firm entering the market. The price point was clear, 610,000 yen. The trader listened, his head tilted slightly to the side as he processed the numbers. He did not need to write anything down. He stored the figures instantly, his brain mapping the trade as a routine transaction. The client paused, waiting for confirmation that the command had been received. The trader nodded to the empty air in front of him, a quick, downward dip of his chin. "Understood," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the cooling systems. The connection clicked off, leaving him back in the quiet isolation of his desk. He stared at the blank input field on his screen, the cursor continuing its steady, rhythmic pulse. The order was logged in his mind, ready to be typed. It was just another trade in a 1,000-trade day. The trader shifted in his seat, the leather of the chair groaning under his weight. He reached out to move his coffee cup, sliding it 3 inches to the right to clear a path for his wrists. This was a habit born of years behind the desk, a subconscious clearing of space that he performed without a second thought. He didn't look at the screen as he did it. His eyes were already scanning the periphery of the trading floor, checking for movement among his colleagues. A stray thought about his plans for the evening flickered through his mind, pulling his attention away from the terminal for a fraction of a second. He turned back, his gaze settling on the keyboard, But the sharp analytical edge that usually defined his work was missing. He was moving on pure muscle memory now. He felt the familiar resistance of the keys beneath his fingertips, a tactile interface he knew better than his own home. He adjusted his posture again, leaning forward, his shoulders rounding as he prepared to input the data. His pulse was slow, steady, and entirely untroubled. He didn't verify the entry field. He didn't check the client's confirmation note. He simply rested his fingers across the home row, eyes glazed over, ready to execute the trade with the thoughtless efficiency of a machine. The keys offered a light, familiar resistance. He began the sequence, his fingers dancing across the layout with practiced speed. He aimed for the quantity field. His right index finger hovered, then struck. Instead of the intended input, his hand shifted a fraction of an inch to the left. It was a subtle, almost microscopic misalignment, the kind that happens when eyes are not tracking the screen. He tapped the number keys in a blur of motion. 610,000. The number felt right in his mind, a rhythm he had played out 100 times before. He hit the price field. His fingers moved again, fluid and unthinking. 1. The digit registered with a sharp click. He did not pause to verify the layout. He did not look at the confirmation box that shimmered into existence. His brain was already moving to the next task on his list. He pressed the keys with a finality that felt like routine. He was not inputting a request. He was executing a command that had already formed in his muscle memory. The sequence was locked. The digits were set in the wrong slots, perfectly wrong, and the system accepted the input without a second of hesitation. The terminal screen refreshed, the blue light reflecting in the trader's eyes. There it sat, a monolith of a command. 610,000 shares. The quantity field was packed with digits, a dense, jagged line of numbers that shouldn't exist. Beside it, the price field held a single, solitary unit, 1 yen. The contrast was physically jarring. He blinked, the image burning into his retinas. His breath hitched, catching in his throat as if he had swallowed a stone. He leaned in closer, his nose inches from the glass, as if the proximity could rewrite the code. Every zero in that quantity field stared back at him with mocking clarity. The math was simple, yet the implications were vast. A crushing weight that began to settle in his gut. This was not a minor adjustment or a slip of the wrist. It was an anomaly of catastrophic proportions. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white, his heart rate spiking against his ribs. The market was minutes from opening, and this digital ghost was sitting in the queue, ready to trigger a landslide. He looked at the total value, the numbers forming a sum that defied logic. A single share of a new firm, sold at the price of a candy bar, in a volume that could strip the market bare. The error was absolute. It was a monster of his own making, pulsing on the screen, waiting for the clock to strike. A box appeared. It was not subtle. It sliced through the blue glow of the terminal, a harsh, geometric frame of white light against the dark interface. The system had awakened. It recognized the logic gap, the impossibility of a high-volume sale at a rock-bottom price. Text pulsed within the frame, bold and unrelenting. A query, a demand for confirmation. It was a digital barrier, a final checkpoint designed to prevent exactly this kind of collapse. The trader stared at it. The box sat squarely over the order details, obscuring the zeros that had moments ago seemed so impossible. It was a lifeline in the form of a dialogue prompt. A single click could erase the mistake. A single movement of the mouse could reset the queue and save the firm from millions in losses. The cursor blinked nearby. A rhythmic, steady pulse that counted down the seconds remaining until the market opened. The warning demanded focus, yet the trader remained motionless. The screen light caught the sweat on his forehead, reflecting a sharp, clinical glare. The system was doing its job. It was waiting for a human hand to verify, to pause, to think. The entire sequence held its breath, suspended in the space between the flashing warning and the execution key. The warning box was a flickering intrusion. To the trader, it was not a safety net. It was a speed bump in a high-velocity workflow. He squinted at the screen, his jaw set in a line of irritation. His fingers drummed a frantic, uneven rhythm against the edge of the desk. He viewed the prompt as a technical nuisance, a ghost in the machine that occasionally stalled his rhythm. Years of repetition had eroded his caution. He had seen thousands of these prompts before, and every single one had been a false alarm. He decided in a fraction of a second that this was no different. He did not read the text. He did not verify the digits. He saw the box only as an obstacle to his efficiency. With a sharp dismissive movement, he shifted his focus away from the cautionary text and back to the core order. His mind was already 3 steps ahead, anticipating the market opening, blinded by the momentum of his own routine. The system continued to pulse, a silent, glowing plea for a second look that went entirely ignored. He felt the weight of the moment, but he misidentified it as pressure to perform rather than a warning to stop. He reached for the keyboard, his posture rigid, his intent fixed on the final confirmation. The safety prompt remained on the display, unclicked and unheeded. As he prepared to override the last barrier between order and chaos, the office was deathly quiet. A low, constant hum of air conditioning units provided the only background noise. His hand hovered above the keyboard, the skin pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. He did not hesitate. His index finger stiffened, locking into a posture of absolute, misguided confidence. He did not look at the screen one last time. He did not reread the numbers. He simply pushed. The plastic key traveled down with a sharp, mechanical click. It was a crisp, definitive sound that cut through the silence of the room. He felt the resistance of the spring beneath the key, a final physical pushback from the hardware itself. The contact was made. The circuit closed. A surge of data left the terminal, traveling through the local network toward the exchange. He felt the recoil in his fingertip as the key snapped back into place. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the lingering echo of that strike. The command was gone. It had left his control, moving into the vast, digital architecture of the market. He leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight, watching the screen as the interface transitioned. The order had been sent. The catastrophe was now a matter of timing. There was no going back from the silence that followed that single, final tap. At 9:30 a.m., the digital gate swung open. The order arrived at the Tokyo Stock Exchange gateway with the force of a wrecking ball. It did not queue behind other trades. It bypassed the standard validation protocols, sinking straight into the heart of the matching engine. For a fraction of a millisecond, the system pulsed with an impossible instruction: sell 610,000 shares for a single yen each. The algorithm did not blink. It did not pause to verify the sanity of the input. It saw a sell order and a matching buy side and executed the transaction with brutal, automated efficiency. Across the trading floor, the silence of the morning vanished. Screens that had displayed stable growth began to flicker and turn a violent, uniform red. The ticker tape accelerated, struggling to keep pace with the sudden vertical drop in value. Phones began to ring in unison, a jagged, discordant chorus that filled the room. Traders stood up from their desks, eyes locked onto terminals as the price of JCOM evaporated. The order had hit the market like a tidal wave, and in the span of a single heartbeat, the stability of the entire exchange had been washed away. The core matching engine of the exchange accepted the instruction as absolute truth. There was no human intervention, no secondary check, and no hesitation. The code scanned the parameters and found them mathematically valid within its own isolated logic. It did not recognize the typo as an error. It saw only a command that demanded immediate fulfillment. A warning flag flickered deep within the server architecture, a tiny digital amber light signaling a potential anomaly. But the system's priority settings overrode the alert. It was built for speed, not for judgment. It treated the order to dump 600,000 shares as a standard volume trade. The algorithm parsed the request, matched the supply, and confirmed the transaction. The exchange's internal ledger updated in real time, cementing the impossible price into the history of the market. It was a flawless execution of a flawed directive. The software performed exactly as programmed, stripping away the value of the firm with cold robotic precision. The logic of the machine had completely detached from the reality of the market, turning a simple keystroke error into a permanent, unalterable fact of the trading day. The system did not care about the consequences. It only cared about the cycle of processing the next line of data. On the monitors, the JCOM stock price began to hemorrhage. It plummeted with a velocity that defied market mechanics. 600,000, 400,000, 100,000. The numbers blurred, scrolling past the screen in a blur of crimson. Traders leaned in, squinting at the flickering digits, convinced that the feed had simply malfunctioned. One analyst tapped his keyboard, refreshing the connection, waiting for the correction that never came. The digits continued their downward slide, unchecked and unstoppable. 50,000, 10,000, 500. The room grew unnervingly quiet as the realization took hold. This was not a data error. It was the market reality rewriting itself in real time. The price hit 100, then 50, then 10. Every person on the floor watched, paralyzed, as billions of yen in market capitalization vanished into the void. Finally, the ticker locked. The price held steady at a single, absurd yen. The silence that followed was heavy, a suffocating vacuum, where the value of a recruiting firm had stood only seconds before. The impossibility of the situation settled over the room like a physical weight, leaving everyone staring at the screen in absolute, hollow disbelief. The silence shattered in an instant. A single desk phone shrilled, a piercing, synthetic sound that cut through the floor like a blade. Then another followed, and another. The rhythmic chirping became a cacophony of urgent, overlapping demands. Traders surged from their chairs, headsets dangling from their necks, eyes wide with the frantic need for answers. Shouts erupted from the back of the room, voices cracking under the weight of the impossible data. People scrambled across the floor, colliding with chairs and scattering stacks of paper as they rushed toward the supervisor's desks. The air, once still and cold, turned thick with the sound of desperate inquiries. Every phone line on the board lit up at once, a solid wall of blinking amber lights. Questions flew in every direction, none finding an answer. Why was the stock at 1 yen? Who authorized the dump? Where was the liquidity? The orderly structure of the firm dissolved into a swarm of frantic motion. Hands slammed against desks, keyboards clattered, and the collective noise grew until it was a roar. The financial world was waking up to the error, and the floor of Mizuho Securities was the eye of a gathering violent storm. At the center of the storm, the trader sat motionless. The roar of the floor was a distant hum, eclipsed by the flickering glow of his terminal. He stared at the screen, his cursor hovering over the trade history log. He clicked. A window expanded, displaying the transaction details in cold, black text. His eyes tracked the line. Sell 610,000 shares. Price, 1 yen. He blinked, certain his mind was playing tricks. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing until the glass of the monitor felt inches from his face. The numbers did not change. The quantity remained an impossible mountain. The price remained a single, worthless coin. He felt the blood drain from his head, leaving his skin cold and his vision narrowing to a tunnel. His pulse hammered against his temples. He had typed it. He had confirmed it. The realization settled into his chest like lead. This was not a glitch in the exchange. It was his own hand, his own keystroke, and his own catastrophic failure. The magnitude of $300 million began to sink in, turning the air around his desk heavy and impossible to breathe. He sat frozen, a silent witness to the fire he had ignited with a single, slip-of-the-finger error. The paralysis broke. The trader lunged forward, his fingers clawing at the keyboard as if he could physically pull the trade back through the keys. He slammed his index finger onto the cancel function key. Nothing happened. He struck it again, harder this time, the plastic clicking sharply against the frame. His knuckles turned white, his muscles coiled with a frantic, animalistic need to undo the last 10 seconds of his life. He hammered the sequence into the terminal, his breath coming in ragged, shallow bursts. Every keystroke was a desperate prayer. He watched the screen, his pupils dilated, waiting for the confirmation of a successful halt. He reached for the mouse, his palms slick with sweat, and clicked the cancel icon with violent precision. He did not wait for the system to process. He clicked it again, then again, a rapid-fire rhythm of panic. His entire world narrowed down to the small, blinking cursor on the display. A tiny beacon of hope amidst the red tide of falling stock prices. He pushed the enter key with the weight of his entire body, his jaw clenched, demanding that the system obey his command to stop the bleeding. The bank's millions were leaking out, and he was the only one trying to plug the dam. The screen did not flicker with the success he craved. Instead, the display hung, frozen in a digital stalemate. The trader leaned in, his eyes burning, waiting for the command to register. Then, the silence of the monitor broke. A dialog box snapped into existence, stark and bright against the dark background. It was a standard system alert, but to him, it looked like a death warrant. He read the text aloud, his voice a dry rasp. Invalid request. He stared at the error code. It was not a glitch. It was a hard-coded wall. The system had processed his previous order with lethal efficiency, but now, it deemed his cancellation request impossible. He clicked the OK button to dismiss the prompt, but it returned instantly, a recurring pulse of rejection. The terminal was no longer his tool. It had become an unyielding gatekeeper. He tapped the key again, his finger hovering for a heartbeat before pressing down. The same box appeared. The same words stared back. He looked away from the monitor to the rest of the trading floor, where the chaos was now deafening, but his focus snapped back to the screen. The trap had closed. The system had prioritized the initial error over his attempt to correct it, and there was no override in sight. The rejection box remained fixed, a mocking icon of his failure. The trader did not blink. He ignored the impossibility of the error and turned his rage toward the input device itself. He slammed his palm against the escape key, the impact vibrating through the desk and rattling his coffee mug. He did not stop. He began to strike the keys with a rhythmic, hammering force, trying to force the system to acknowledge the cancellation through sheer kinetic energy. His fingers moved in a blur of motion, landing on the board with the force of a desperate man fighting a physical opponent. He struck the enter key until the plastic frame groaned under the pressure. The sharp, staccato sound of keys bottoming out filled his cubicle, a frantic percussion against the growing roar of the trading floor. He was no longer typing commands. He was assaulting the machine. His breathing was heavy, jagged, and rhythmic, synchronized with the rapid-fire thuds of his hands against the interface. He grabbed the edges of the keyboard, his knuckles straining as he tried to pry it from the desk, momentarily forgetting that the machine was not the problem. Every blow was an attempt to break the digital barrier, a futile struggle against a system that had already moved beyond his reach. The keys rattled, loose and unresponsive, as he hammered them once more into the frame. The keyboard clattered, a broken shell of plastic under his hands, but the screen ignored his assault. A new window cascaded down the terminal. Not an error message, but a background process log. He watched the lines of code stream past, a waterfall of data that felt alien. Then, the truth crawled out of the text. A hidden, recursive loop had engaged. The system was trapped in a verification cycle that placed a higher priority on the initial cell execution than on any incoming interrupt command. It was not just a failure. It was a digital blockade. The software recognized his cancellation attempts, cataloged them, and then discarded them as low-priority noise. He watched the status bar. The cell order was locked, buffered, and unstoppable. The machine had effectively walled itself off from human oversight. He tapped the command prompt, and the terminal responded with a cold, singular output. Transaction priority, absolute. The glitch had created a feedback loop that treated the original catastrophic typo as the primary objective. He pulled his hands away from the desk, as if the metal were white-hot. The terminal sat there, humming with a steady, electric indifference, processing the destruction of millions without a single hesitation. It was a perfect, merciless automaton, and he was nothing more than a spectator to the ruin he had initiated. The screen flickered, shifting from the command prompt to the live market feed. In the center of the terminal, the JCOM stock ticker began a vertical descent. Red numbers blinked in rapid succession, each pulse marking a deeper crater in the firm's valuation. Millions of dollars were not just moving, they were dissolving into the digital ether. The trader stood motionless, his gaze locked on the digits as they bled away. Across the room, the silence of his individual failure transformed into a collective roar. Phones began to chime in a dissonant, overlapping symphony of panic. Colleagues crowded around the terminal, their faces illuminated by the harsh, downward trending glow of the monitor. No one spoke. They watched the price hit 600,000, then 500,000, plummeting faster than the eye could track. The terminal processed thousands of automated transactions per second, each one a nail in the coffin of their capital. He reached out to touch the screen, his hand trembling, but stopped inches away. The machine was devouring their balance sheet with clinical precision. Outside his cubicle, the floor was a blur of shouting analysts and discarded paperwork. He checked the clock. 2 minutes had passed. In that window, a fortune had vanished into the void, leaving behind only flickering red pixels and the crushing weight of a terminal that would not stop. While the trading floor erupted in shouting, the digital signal carried the error across the city. It reached screens in quiet apartments and private offices, where the noise of the panic was absent. A trader known as CIS sat before his own terminal. His focus narrowed to the live feed of the Tokyo Stock Exchange. He saw it instantly. The JCOM ticker had decoupled from reality. The price was not sliding. It had crashed to a single yen. To the panicked analysts at the bank, this was a disaster. To the independent traders watching the data, it was a signal. CIS leaned in. His eyes scanned the order book, confirming the volume was real and the price was locked. The anomaly stood out against the stable rows of the rest of the market like a flare in the night. He checked the timestamp. The trade was active, the order was open, and the system was still accepting entries. His fingers hovered over the buy button. He did not care about the human error or the shouting on the floor. He saw only the gap between the valuation and the current price. It was a statistical impossibility that offered a profit of unprecedented scale. The hunt had begun. CIS did not hesitate. He punched the command into his keyboard, requesting thousands of shares at the single yen price. The system pinged back immediately. Order confirmed. He did not stop to celebrate or breathe. He hit the keys again, doubling his position, then tripling it. Each keystroke was a bridge between the bank's collapsing capital and his own account. The transfer of wealth happened in milliseconds. A silent, digital hemorrhage that no human voice on the floor could interrupt. He watched the order book fill up. Thousands of shares moved from the bank's holdings to his portfolio. The numbers on his terminal climbed with every click, shifting from simple figures to life-changing sums. It was a rhythmic, relentless cycle of execution. Buy, confirm, refresh, buy, confirm, refresh. The gap between the market's error and his own profit narrowed until the trade volume reached its limit. He pushed the system to its breaking point, absorbing every available share the exchange would grant him. The screen turned into a blur of green confirmation alerts. Millions of dollars were pouring into his control as if he were harvesting a field left unguarded. He clicked one last time, locking in the final batch of shares before the system finally groaned under the weight of the unprecedented traffic. The system could not hold. Millions of requests piled into the queue, each one straining the logic of the exchange. Then, the flow stopped. The order book vanished. A red banner splashed across every terminal connected to the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Trading halted. The effect was instantaneous. The frantic rhythm of the market, the hum of servers, and the rapid flashes of data all died in a single heartbeat. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. It was a vacuum where seconds ago there had been a roar of activity. On the floor, the shouting did not stop immediately. It stuttered into a confused, low-volume murmur before fading entirely. Traders stood motionless, staring at dead screens that no longer updated. The connection to the world of numbers had been severed. Every terminal remained frozen on the final catastrophic snapshot of the market. The digital hemorrhage was plugged, but the damage was already etched into the accounts. No one moved. No one spoke. The heavy, pressurized stillness of the room felt like a physical weight pressing down on every person present. The era of the error had reached its final, static conclusion. CIS pulled his hands away from the keyboard. The screen before him was a static monument to a $20 million windfall. He scrolled through the transaction logs one final time. Each entry was a clean, brutal confirmation of the bank's catastrophic oversight. He did not cheer, he did not shout. He simply watched the final balance sit fixed in the corner of his monitor, a sum that would have taken most lifetimes to earn. Outside his immediate space, the rest of the world was waking up to the magnitude of the glitch. But here, the work was finished. He leaned back, the chair creaking in the unnaturally quiet room. He had been a spectator to a disaster, and now he was the primary beneficiary of its wreckage. He reached out and clicked the power button. The screen flickered and died, leaving him in the soft, ambient light of his office. He stood up, adjusted his seat, and walked away from the desk. He left behind a terminal that had turned a typo into a fortune. He moved toward the door, his footsteps steady on the floor, leaving the digital ghost of the market crash behind him. The day had started with a single errant keystroke, and it was ending with the quiet, calculated departure of a man who had mastered the chaos. The silence in the offices of Mizuho Securities did not last. It was shattered by the arrival of the final audit reports. Accountants worked in a blur of motion, cross-referencing every trade, every sell order, and every fractional price shift that occurred during those 3 minutes of madness. They did not look up. They stared at long scrolling columns of data, stripping away the noise to find the absolute bottom line. The supervisors gathered in the center of the room, faces pale, hands gripping the edges of mahogany desks. They waited for the final tally. A lead analyst walked to the center of the floor and held up a single sheet of paper. The room went cold. The calculation was complete. The bank had hemorrhaged $334 million. The number hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. It was not just a loss of capital. It was the cost of a single, misplaced digit that had bypassed every safeguard in the system. The scale of the disaster was now fixed, etched into the balance sheets as a permanent record of failure. 4 minutes of trading had wiped out years of careful growth. There was no more speculation. The damage was absolute, measured, and verified. The bank stood at the edge of the abyss, staring down into the total sum of their mistake. The news of the $334 million loss did not stay contained within the bank. By midday, it was the only topic in the financial district. Regulators arrived at the Tokyo Stock Exchange before the building even cleared for the evening. They demanded answers. They wanted to know how a single, impossible order had bypassed every automated safety trigger. The exchange leadership scrambled to provide a defense, but the logs were damning. The system had functioned exactly as it was coded, and that was the core of the problem. It lacked the capacity to stop an obvious error. The public outcry intensified with every passing hour. Fingers pointed from the bank toward the exchange, and from the exchange toward the regulators. The pressure reached the top floor of the Tokyo Stock Exchange. In a brief, controlled press conference, the CEO stood before a bank of microphones. He did not deflect. He did not offer excuses for the glitch. He spoke for less than a minute, acknowledging that the oversight occurred on his watch. He placed his resignation on the table, effectively ending his tenure. He walked away from the podium, leaving the room in a heavy, stunned silence. The institutional head had fallen, yet the system remained broken, waiting for the next error to expose its cracks. The departure of the CEO provided a temporary mask for the underlying friction, but it did nothing to resolve the debt. Within weeks, the focus of the crisis shifted from the trading floor to the courtroom. Mizuho Securities initiated a massive lawsuit against the Tokyo Stock Exchange, claiming the failure was not human, but mechanical. Lawyers flooded the offices of the exchange, demanding access to every line of source code that governed the transaction system. They filed thousands of pages of documentation, meticulously mapping the path of the erroneous order. The exchange countered, arguing that the bank held ultimate responsibility for the accuracy of its own inputs. The battle lines were drawn. It was no longer a question of a simple typo. It was a fundamental dispute over who owned the risk in an automated financial world. The case dragged on, moving through courtrooms for years. Judges examined the digital architecture, trying to determine if a system that could process an impossible order was inherently flawed or if the user was the only failure point. The halls of justice became the new arena for the fallout. Every motion filed and every testimony recorded served to dissect the incident, turning a 60-second error into a permanent study of liability, corporate negligence, and the dangerous limits of digital speed. While the lawyers debated liability in wood-paneled courtrooms, the man who typed the order simply ceased to exist in the professional world. He was no longer a trader, a colleague, or a name on an internal directory. He cleared his desk of personal effects on a Tuesday afternoon. There were no farewells. He walked through the glass doors of the office and did not look back. His name was redacted from internal reports, scrubbed from email chains, and eventually replaced by generic labels in corporate audits. He moved through the city like a man erased. He avoided the financial district entirely, steering clear of any screens displaying real-time market data. The weight of $334 million followed him, not as a debt he could pay, but as a shadow that silenced his career. He sought work in sectors that did not rely on high-speed terminals or split-second decisions. He became a ghost, living in the space between events, forever defined by a single keystroke. He left no public footprint, no interviews, and no accounts of the 3 minutes that broke the market. He became the quietest part of the loudest disaster in Tokyo's history, a man who learned that the ultimate consequence of a mistake is the total loss of one's own narrative. The disappearance of the individual trader marked the end of the manhunt, but it failed to address the structural decay that allowed the crisis to happen. The error was not a freak occurrence. It was a design flaw. A system that permitted a sell order for 1 million shares at a single yen without a secondary confirmation gate was a system waiting to collapse. The disaster exposed the absence of a safety net in the automated infrastructure of the exchange. Engineers and analysts later dissected the event, identifying the missing logic traps that could have caught the typo before it touched the market. They found that human input was treated as absolute, with no verification protocol to flag impossible data points. The catastrophe was a failure of engineering, not just a failure of a single person. It demonstrated that in high-speed environments, reliance on human perfection is a design error in itself. The architecture of the market lacked the necessary checks to turn a catastrophic input into a minor speed bump. Building a reliable system requires the assumption that errors will occur. True resilience is not found in the absence of mistakes, but in the presence of barriers that keep those mistakes from becoming terminal. The lesson of the market crash is not about the scale of the loss, but about the reaction to the error. You will encounter your own version of this disaster. You will make mistakes that feel terminal. In those moments, the instinct is to freeze, to watch the red numbers climb, and to wait for the system to stop you. Do not freeze. When you realize the error, your task is to adapt and rebuild the foundation immediately. The global economy absorbed a $334 million mistake and continued to function. That is the proof that errors, no matter how catastrophic, do not have to be the end of the line. Before you hit the next button, pause. Physically force your hand to stop. Check the numbers against the reality of your objective. If you find a flaw, correct it with cold precision. If you have already failed, stop seeking the cause of the disaster and start constructing the solution. The mistake is a data point, not a verdict. Pick up the pieces, adjust the protocols, and get back to work. The world does not stop for your error, and neither should you. Close the window, clear the screen, and begin again.